Hey everyone, it's a new month of Praxis. I'm in Module 4, and this means a new challenge. So for this month, I'll be learning about philosophy and critical thinking. So let's get to it. All right. So the first couple lessons I learned was this week, and I'll give you guys a rundown of it. All right. So first lesson, give it 5 minutes. Basically, what this author is saying, it's by Jason Fried, by the way. He said, when you find yourself in an argument, such as a Facebook argument, it's easy to give in to emotions and to knee-jerk reactions, and to answer to the other person in a very passionate, angry manner, or pissed off manner. So he said, before you do that, take a step back and just give 5 minutes. Just let them argue, and then come back to it. So this helps, formulate your ideas better instead of having your mind clouded with emotions. And it'll definitely help you think more logically. I've done this before many times, especially when I'm arguing with my friends, because, the last thing I want to do is lose friends because of a petty Facebook argument. And the other thing is, I don't want to lose a potential, job either. So the other thing this guy says in this essay is, dismissing an idea is so easy because it doesn't involve any work. So you just ridicule it, you just laugh at it, ignore it, or you ignore it, right? So instead of doing that, we should hear them out and just give them 5 minutes. And I would suggest, walking away for an hour and coming back to the argument. And I've done this before, even quite recently with a new friend of mine. And I didn't want to ruin a new friendship. So, I told the guy, hey, I appreciate your concern, but what I do with my life doesn't affect you, so you shouldn't be concerned at all. So, and then after that, things settle down and everyone is fine. So, no harm done. All right, and the next lesson, the work required to have an opinion. So, this lesson and the give it 5 minutes were some things already known, just like the basic ways to debate someone with logic and reason, instead of just basing your arguments off of emotions, which is the last thing you want to do as well. So in here, it's just basically saying you're entitled to an informed opinion rather than an uninformed opinion. So find your facts, find your research, do your research on the arguments, and then actually, before you allow yourself to have an opinion, know the other side's argument better than they do. So that's pretty interesting. That's what I found interesting. And I've done this as well before, just arguing with leftists. Just knowing where they come from, which is from emotional side of the argument. And I can go into detail about this in another time, but just so I don't get off track, stay informed and get your sources from reputable publications. So that's what it's basically about. You have to think with your brain rather than your heart. Think rationally, not emotionally. All right, so on to the next one. You have no idea how wrong you are. So this concept was kind of new to me. I already know that there's a lot of things I'm wrong about and things that I'm not aware of. And it takes a lot of humbleness to admit that you're wrong. So you gotta shove your arrogance and your pride down the drain. So, in this video, this professor says a lot of these thinkers, famous scientists, 100 years ago, a couple years ago, in the past, basically, were wrong. As brilliant as they were in their theories, they were still wrong. So, and he gives the example of Aristotle, Isaac Newton, and Albert Einstein, and Copernicus. They got a lot of things right, but they also got a lot of things wrong. So Aristotle, he said, all the genetic material of a person comes from the man and only the man. But now we know that's completely false. And with Copernicus, he came up with the solar model of our solar system, saying the Earth revolved around the sun rather than the other way around. But he also said the Earth's orbit around the sun was a perfect circle. But obviously now we know it's an elliptical. And the other thing with Albert Einstein, he was great in all his theories, but he did not get quantum mechanics right. So, and the reason why you have no idea how wrong you are is because we're building up on the work of the previous thinkers and previous scientists and other people like that. So you might be right now in this time period, but like 100 years later, 100 years in the future, you might be totally off. Like the example I like to give is the concept of and the treatment of women and blacks in the United States. So 100 years ago, it's acceptable to refuse service to blacks just for the color of the skin. And now we know that it's completely wrong just because of how unethical it was. And similar thing with women where women were not allowed to vote, or they'll be taken out in the streets and just dragged back home. And there are all sorts of bizarre arguments against women voting, such as they'll neglect their children and their families and abandon their husbands just for voting. And of course, now that's just way off, right? All right, so on to the next lesson. Why philosophers make formidable entrepreneurs. Now, this one is also a new concept for me, because before I joined Praxis, I didn't know how much philosophy was used. I just thought it was like one of those esoteric disciplines, academic disciplines, where like very few people understand it, and it's kind of like an inside joke where only the people who are in this network only know about it, and it's just mostly like a useless discipline. But now I realize just how important it is for entrepreneurs to brush up on their philosophy skills, because there are a lot of similarities between these two. Like philosophers and entrepreneurs, they seek to structure the world. So unlike they face a lot of uncertainty in the world and in their businesses, but they're able to create order out of chaos and execute a plan. And the other point was they're both deeply analytical, like meaning they will run their businesses or their ideas on evidence rather than pure instinct. And the other point, they both find deeper truths. So for entrepreneurs, they try to find the best solutions for the customers in their company. And they find ways to attract the best talent. So I thought this was really interesting. That resonated with me. And of course, both disciplines like to argue. So debate is an essential feature of philosophy. And I mean, how entrepreneurs use this is that they convince investors to invest in their companies in order to raise money. So they have to make clear points in order to convince these investors. And then the last point, philosophers aren't afraid of risk. So that's the same with entrepreneurs. They're both going to fields where there's a lot of uncertainty, where there might not be a lot of job opportunities, where they have to take a gamble and create their own opportunities. So that was one new idea that stood out to me. And let's see. All right, we're on to philosophers and on philosophy. So in here, it's basically asking the question, what is philosophy? So there's just a bunch of people in this article that give their opinion on what they think philosophy is. So there isn't a right or wrong answer. It's very subjective. It's very much like art, actually. And just like art, there is no right or wrong way of doing art itself. So it's kind of like how you know it when you see it. And that's why I compare it to art. It's like, you know it's art when you see it. And I mean, to me, philosophy means just a pursuit and love of wisdom, truth, and knowledge, and applying it to find solutions to our world, to the world around us, like finding answers and trying to make sense of all this chaos around us. So, I mean, that's what I think of philosophy. All right, on to the next concept that I learned. Why hypothetical thinking matters. Now, I didn't quite agree with this one at first, because it just seems so ridiculous the way Brian Kaplan had put it. So he first opens the essay with, where would you buy steaks if you only shopped at stores starting with the letter Q? You know, most people would say, that's just a waste of time thinking about that. Like, who cares? Right? But I think that's just Brian Kaplan's way of just grabbing the reader's attention. So, I mean, he goes on to provide a little bit more practical questions like, if 6 trillion Nazis were sadistically savoring the Holocaust on interstellar television, will the Holocaust still be wrong? So, we could see these hypotheticals possibly happening. But then he goes on to say, if you don't think about these hypothetical situations, you are being evasive and anti-intellectual. So that's the part that really got to me. It's just like, I started to disagree with him at that point. I was like, you know, ordinary people, they have other things to do with their lives. Right? So I first disagreed with him, but then later on I agreed with him when I got to the end over here, because he gave a more relevant example, such as, you know, 5-year-olds, they ask questions to their parents all the time with these what if questions or what about questions. Say, for example, what if our house burns down to the ground? And their parents would say, oh, we'll just move to another home. And the kid will fire back and say, well, what if our second home catches on fire? And what about the third and the fourth? And it seems unlikely, but this is a way for children to, and just people in general, to prepare for the future, to prepare for the worst. So, I mean, if you're finding a way to use this every day in your life, and this is one way to do it, is just ask more questions, ask the right questions. And, yeah, I mean, I at first disagreed with him, but then, you know, I did the give it 5 minutes exercise, and I came back to it and thought, yeah, I can see why hypothetical thinking is very useful, because let's say you own a business and you need to consider what your product can or cannot do. Like, what if it harms people? You know, what if it starts cutting people's limbs off? You need to consider these things and like how it affects beyond your narrow scope. So that's one example or one lesson that really resonated with me, even though I disagreed with it at first. All right, so that, I think I answered all the questions. All right, so yeah, some of the connections I made with the ideas I already knew were just give it 5 minutes and the work required to have an opinion. So these two. And like I said earlier, I already have like a pretty good foundation on logic and reasoning and debating people, because I studied economics on my own and in school, and it helped me strengthen my arguments with logic and reasoning. All right, so that's all I have for today. I'll see you next week in the next video.